when it's 5 or 0 degrees outside, as it has been in the last few days in the Northeast, an air source heat pump is trying to suck heat out of a 0-degree breeze, and we're taking heat out of 55-degree Earth. So we just have a huge edge. And so the air source heat pumps fall back on resistance heat, which is the most expensive and it's the most peaking, and we don't.
Hardware to Save a Planet explores the technical innovations that are giving us hope in the fight against climate change. Each episode focuses on a specific climate challenge and explores an emerging physical technology solution with the person bringing it into reality. I'm your host, Dylan Garrett. Hardware to Save a Planet is brought to you by Synapse. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks for listening. Hello and welcome to Hardware to Save a Planet. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Dan Yates, the CEO and Chairman of Dandelion Energy. Dandelion spun out of Google X in 2017 and has been growing ever since, installing ground source geothermal heat pumps in homes to electrify residential heating. This is an important part of the whole challenge of reducing emissions because globally we burn as much fossil fuel heating homes as we do driving cars. We've talked before on the show about air source heat pumps, which exchange heat with the air outside your home. But geothermal heat pumps have the advantage of working with the constant temperature of the earth below ground, which means they often don't have to do as much work and use as much energy to heat up or cool down a house. One reason I'm excited to talk with Dan is that Dandelion has already installed over 3,000 systems. So they've worked through a lot of the early growing pains of hardware companies. Dan himself has some significant experience in the industry. Prior to Dandelion, he was the co-founder and CEO of Opower, which is actually the company that first opened my eyes to the importance of flattening the electricity demand curve. Opower IPO'd in 2014 and sold to Oracle in 2016. And Dan joined Dandelion as executive chairman in the early days of the company and took on the CEO role in 2023. Dan, it's an honor to have you on the show. Thanks a lot for joining.
Thanks so much for having me, Dylan.
So I think it's good context actually to start with Opower. It helps us see a little bit of your background, and I think it also kind of helps set the stage for some of the challenges you're solving with Dandelion. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that and how you got from that to Dandelion.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, actually, a big part of Opower was really a behavioral science idea, mixed with a big data idea, and actually was just interviewed for a retrospective of Robert Cialdini's life. Robert Cialdini was the behavioral scientist who actually first, really zeroed in on the efficacy of normative comparisons, which is the behavioral science word for comparing you to your neighbors. And his research study that my co-founder Alex and I happened to stumble across by a series of lucky events. His research study that he conducted in Southern California and San Marcos in probably 2006 was the thing that actually gave us the confidence to start Opower. Because the idea behind Opower was that there were tons of energy efficiency programs going on across the country, and almost all of them were essentially utilities just paying money to lower the costs of efficient products and services, which makes sense. So, if LED at the time cost $7, the utility spent $3 per LED to make it only $4. And that would accelerate sales and that would drive efficiency. And our theory was that the most untouched, inefficient part of the system was actually the human in the house. And if you could persuade and educate humans by the millions that you could adjust energy usage as much or more than if you were adjusting the machines that they were surrounded by. And then Cialdini's study gave us the conviction that it was really that it was measurable, that it wasn't just like marketing mumbo jumbo, that we could actually put real numbers behind it. And so we started pitching utilities on this idea of, hey, let's manage the human factor. And when we did these programs, we would do randomized control trials. So we would subtract out some percentage of the population to compare against, so we could get really undeniable, statistically significant results of the energy impact. So that was the idea behind Opower. I had been an entrepreneur already once before. It's a repeat software entrepreneur. My previous company was an educational software. Alex Lasky and I founded Opower in '07. We started selling utilities, building the software. And as you described, we ended up going public. We ended up really getting, because we were a software company, really into the data side of things too. So we were, at the time of IPO, ingesting almost half of all US smart meter data and running it through our systems, doing some pretty interesting analytics on that stuff. So we could, so in its maturity, Opower was not just telling you how you compared to similar homes nearby, but we actually were able to disaggregate your heating load from your cooling load and give you targeted recommendations. We could identify electric vehicle signals in the meter reads, and so it really became pretty sophisticated. But all on the service of giving people plain and useful advice in a frame that was motivating and clear.
Right. Yeah, this is what's behind, like, on my energy bill or my report from PG&E saying I've used this much energy relative to my neighbors or other similar households, right?
Exactly. PG&E was our first really big customer. They hold a special place in my heart. First for selecting us, and there was a lot of warmth there. And then they put us through the ringer at times. So it was,
Yeah, I bet.
They were a tough customer at times because they were powerful and demanding. And they should be.
Yeah.
But no, we've done a lot of good stuff with them, which has been, it's nice to see it continues.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a cool story. So yeah, through Opower focused on changing kind of behavior in the house, not the machines in the house. And then Dandelion is actually going back to the machines in the house, right? So I'm curious, like, what were you seeing? And I know you joined early on in the early days of Dandelion. What were you seeing then that made you decide to go back on to solving the problem from that side?
Yeah, so it actually was very much informed by my Opower experience. The single biggest thing we got people to do at Opower was to adjust their thermostat settings. That was like, if you could get somebody to change their thermostat from 70 in the summer to 73, they would save like 15% on their annual bill. It was just such a humongous swing. And the reason why is that the majority of energy consumption in the home is heating and cooling, and it's almost all of the like kind of voluntary or adjustable load in the home. So when I got introduced to Dandelion, it was the first time I was meeting a company that had a really significant capability to reduce that aggregate load, that biggest load in the house. So if you're going to go after the machines, go after the machine that actually consumes most of the energy in the home. And with Dandelion, we can cut the load in half. And we can drive it to be 100% electric, which will over time be 100% renewable. So, the big, the electrification story is the story of our generation. We're all familiar with the electrification of cars. And while it has had its fits and starts here in the US as a global phenomenon, electric vehicles are just surging. And there's no question that our grandchildren and children, to the extent that they even drive a car,
Right.
But the robot that drives their car will be driving an electric car.
I hope my daughter never drives a car, but yes.
Yeah, I'm like right on the edge with my kids. The same is true with heating and cooling. It's just a little bit behind. It's coming about 5-10 years behind electric vehicles. And it just doesn't have it hasn't had quite as much pizzazz or, notoriety, depending on how you look at it, associated with the companies behind the transition. But it's the same size problem as you described earlier. The energy consumption in aggregate and the emissions are on par with transportation. So Dandelion sits at the nexus of a bunch of really big trends. One is electrification. One is decarbonization decarbonization of buildings. And then importantly, sort of another side of that same facet is energy efficiency. And then increasingly importantly, it's this other massive macro trend, which is radical increases in energy demand, largely driven by AI and broad-based electrification, are leading to a real grid crisis. And geothermal really shines in that context. So, we can drop the consumption of a home relative to an air source heat pump by almost half in aggregate. But we can cut the peak load by like 75%. And the reason why is that our heat pumps work equally well on the coldest and hottest days of the year as they do on those intermediate days, because they're exchanging heat with the earth, and the earth doesn't know that it's a cold day. Our boreholes are 500 feet down, and as soon as you get 10 feet, yeah,
okay,
as soon as you get 10 feet below ground, the earth's temperature is more or less constant all year. So when it's 5 or 0 degrees outside, as it has been in the last few days in the Northeast, an air source heat pump is trying to suck heat out of a 0 degree breeze, and we're taking heat out of 55-degree earth. So we just have a huge edge. And so the air source heat pumps fall back on resistance heat, which is it's the most expensive and it's the most peaking, and we don't. And that's the big difference. So what we're seeing is states. I mean, we sell to take us actually to I'll stop for a second here and give me a long answer, but we actually sell to home builders. I really like to talk about why they're buying, but keep this in the kind of this macro context for one more minute. The states that have been pushing electrification and air source heat pumps are now seeing that in aggregate, the peak, they're all facing winter peaks that are coming very quickly. And they're going to be grid constrained by peaking air source heat pumps that don't perform on cold days. And that's true not only in Massachusetts, but it's actually also true in Texas and in these southern states that are seeing more frequent, freakishly cold days. And their natural gas peakers they freeze up, and it's all resistance heat. So, geothermal is just very well positioned to help in all of these different regions.
So you're saying as it gets cold in these regions, the air source heat pump can't actually act as a heat pump anymore. It flips into resistance heating mode as a backup.
That's right.
Just the energy required is so much greater in that mode.
Yeah, you'll see like a 15 kilowatt aux heat strip in an air source heat pump. 15 kilowatts is a pretty big load.
Yeah. Okay. And so everybody's coming online doing that at the same time when it's cold out. Now there are enough, we've transitioned enough homes to heat pumps, which seems like a good thing overall, that's been, but it's putting this stress on the grid. The grid has to now have capacity to manage those peak events.
That's right. And so what states and utilities are seeing is you can either spend billions on central distribution upgrades and transmission upgrades, and that's very hard. It's politically difficult. You have to go through big rate cases. It's sort of a once and done. It's these big lumps that you have to get permission on. There's imminent domain issues with new, siting of any new lines. It's hard. Or if you subsidize ground source heat pumps, you have a distributed infrastructure that's literally invisible underground. Each home can be, fitted separately. There's no shared space issues. There's none of these big centralized challenges. So you have this alternative that is very straightforward to roll out. You just have to incentivize it.
And just to spend another minute on the peak load challenge, is it right that to manage those peaks, we end up having like peaker plants on the grid, which are more expensive and dirtier, result in dirtier energy essentially on the grid and more expensive energy on the grid to sort of manage, but because we're sized for that sort of peak demand. So if we can take that peak down, and this actually was on your website, something like, well, it's the only technology that will reduce the cost of electricity with full installation. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yes, that's exactly right. Because essentially, if you take the peak as the capacity you have to manage, and then you look at the area under that curve or line of how much actually is used, um, we fill it up more than anybody because we can survive under a much lower peak
Right.
capacity. Yeah.
Right.
So the levelized cost actually goes down.
Yeah. So what about installation? Because one of the great things about a mini split heat pump or something like this is you've got a thing to put on the outside of the house and a thing to put on the inside of the house, and you're done. And I know that installation, even in that case, can be a prohibitively expensive process for some people. Like the one thing that's always stood out to me is climate change is an area under the curve problem. The faster we can scale these solutions, the better. The more time we have with these solutions in operation, the better.
100%.
It just hearing about this 500-foot deep hole, borehole, like it sounds very expensive and time consuming to install these things.
So it's not time consuming. It has been expensive, and that's been forever. That's been, and in a way, you could say Dandelion's entire story is that we found it in the pursuit of making geothermal cost effective upfront. Geothermal is exceptionally it has always had a great payback. It's sort of like solar in the 80s, where the zealots ran the numbers and said, wow, if I own this thing for 25 years, I'll have free electricity and it pays for itself. And that's a very small set of folks who are willing to make a 25-year commitment, who have the resources, who have the vision, et cetera. Most people are like, I can't spend $45,000 no matter how much you tell me it's going to save me money. And in fact, historically, geothermal systems in a retrofit like residential environment could cost upwards of $75,000. So it's really has been the province of the wealthy. And the reason why the wealthy do it is not because they're energy zealots. It's because geothermal really is the most luxurious solution. It's quiet. It's totally invisible. You have no outside condensers, so you have no noise in the summertime. You're sitting in your back porch. People, we're all up and down the East Coast. The expectation, and through the Midwest and into the Southwest, the expectation in the summer is you're going to hear like the compressed.
Yeah, it's loud. Mm-hmm.
All gone. And in a geothermal neighborhood, all you hear is the wind and the trees and the birds singing. And it really, like, you're like, why is it so lovely here? And they're not hulking masses in, like, especially in townhomes. There's nowhere to put them. And then the systems last forever. The borehole, the ground loop lasts literally 100 years, the lifetime of the building. And the interior, the heat pump, because it's all inside in your mechanical room, it also lasts 25 to 30 years compared to a conventional air conditioner, which will only last you a little over a decade. So the system, it performed, and it uses like at least at most 70% of the energy of a conventional system, and is sometimes as little as 50%. So on sort of every other metric, aside from upfront cost, it's the slam dunk winner: efficiency, noise, luxury, like quality, reliability, maintenance. Okay, so what we have focused on as a consequence is just driving down that cost. And there's a couple things that we've done that have made a big difference, and we're now installing systems. So the biggest switch we've done is we are now working primarily with production home builders, so for new homes. And the two things that does for us, one is it essentially eliminates our mobilization costs. So when Dandelion was started, we focused working with individual retrofits, selling to existing homes. And so you have to show up you have to move all your equipment to the house. I always joke, you get there and like grandma's tercel is in the driveway and she's not answering the door. And until she can move the tercel, you can't bring the drill rig in, and then you get set up. And then it's actually like a day to a day and a half per borehole. It's very quick to do the drilling, but then you got to pack it all up and you got to go to the next home and they got to be ready. So when we do work with production builders, we will mobilize to a site that is at rough grade, which to the normal human is code for a brown flat field with nothing on it. And then we roll our rig out, and our partners we'll have staked where the boreholes go, and we drill borehole 1, we move over 50 feet, 30 feet, we drill borehole 2, and we can do basically one a day, and we don't have to mobilize till we get 20 done. So even if our mobilization is, let's say our mobilization is further or 50% more time consuming for whatever reason, we've still cut the mobilization by like 93% because we're spreading one mobilization out over 20 bores instead of one per
meaning
bore.
a 20 a housing development with 20 houses is what you're talking about.
Exactly. And we'll do housing developments. We're doing a housing development right now in Maryland with, I believe, 250 houses, but they don't do them all at once. So we do them in chunks of 20, let's say. So mobilization cost gets vaporized. And then the other big thing is that the builder's building the house. So we don't, to the specification of the equipment, so we don't have to there's no incremental cost inside. And with a retrofit, there's often modifications to ductwork. There's often the addition of ductwork because you'll have a homeowner who, as part of it, has historically had 2 separate systems heating their house and they want to combine them or whatever the case, or add air conditioning. And all of that interior retrofit ductwork becomes its own mini custom construction project, which is very complex and low margin and fraught. So we've sort of sidestepped all of that stuff. And now what we're seeing is it's working. So it's really working in Colorado, in the Mountain West, it's working in the Mid-Atlantic, and it's working in the Northeast. And that's where we're really focusing our efforts. And the builders that we're working with are really happy with the results. So one of our biggest customers is Lennar, who's also an investor in the company. We have a big project with them you can read about in Colorado. We're doing thousands of homes with them. And we're getting early reports now from their salespeople in the communities selling these homes. And it's like they've literally, the literal quotes, like, this is the best thing that's happened to us since, the last few years. I start my tour in the basement is my favorite quote. No one's ever given a new home tour starting in the basement, because people, and the critical thing is the builder salespeople are saying that people are coming to these communities because of the geo. And it's because if you know about geothermal, it's because your rich uncle had geothermal in his like $3 million house. And for you to buy a starter home with geothermal is really exciting. So it's just been great for us to reorient this way. And then I can't give you all the economics, but I can say that between the incentives that our buyers are getting from the state and federal government, and those incentives can be in the tens of thousands of dollars, and are much lower costs, we're seeing in many cases that our builder partners are not paying any premium to put in geothermal, which is just something you would never have imagined 5 years ago. Because the conventional air source heat pump equipment is like $2,500 for these big builders, maybe $3,500, and then they pay $1,000 or $1,500 to install. And the idea that you could sort of fit under that price envelope with a geothermal system, that's what's unlocked it for us. And part of it is the things we started talking about at the beginning, states realizing this and upping their incentives. And then the other part is Dandelion's contribution is we've brought our costs way down. So our list price is regularly well below $30,000. And so then when you start to parcel these pieces together, and for townhomes, it comes down even further, you get to a viable price. And that's the plan now.
Yeah. Okay. So focusing on new builds, what have you done to bring the cost down? Is that just economies of scale, or is there any kind of innovation in your drilling process or the heat pump itself?
There's been a couple things. One is innovation in the design process. So we've done a lot of it. Because you mentioned this early, we have over 3,000 homes. We have we're getting close to 4,000 now. And we have monitoring on a statistically significant number of those homes, and we're able to see the performance of the systems, and it's allowed us to fine tune. We have, unlike essentially anybody else, because we've not only designed and spec'd the home, we've actually done the installation, and now we have the monitoring. So we know exactly what we did and how it's performed. We have much better information on the actual thermal performance of these ground loops relative to specification, and it's allowed us to tune much more closely to cut costs, to reduce depending on the region, make different adjustments to the amount of bore that we need to drill for the size of a home. We've also changed our install process, and we've basically cut out a step because we've working with our builders, we can drill the boreholes in much more advantageous locations where we no longer have to do a bunch of lateral work once they're drilled to connect them into the heat pump. So we're like engineering a step out of the system installation process. And then scale matters. So when you're buying heat pumps and ground loop by the thousand, you pay a lot less than when you were buying them one at a time. So it's all of those things. It's like the company that I tell our team, and it's funny because we're a tech company, but I tell them we need our North Star is Costco. Like that's the company I want us to be. I want to do great by our customers. I want to focus on a few SKUs that we dominate in, and I want to get to scale faster than anybody else. And that's how you mainstream geothermal. I'll add one last thing, actually, which is a little bit of a preview, but we have been in the technology business, unlike Costco, but and we've built our own heat pump. And the first heat pump we built was oriented towards retrofit customers. And we've been retooling, and we're going to be, we're going to be bringing back out new optimized heat pumps for builders that'll further bring down the costs. And we're doing that in conjunction with partners because we're not a manufacturer, but we're continuing to drive the heat pump cost down as well. So those are all the pieces. What is it? What is a geothermal system? It's the design, it's the installation, and it's the technology. And we're driving costs down on all of those fronts.
Yeah. The part I don't feel like I have a good grasp on is the borehole and that ground loop itself. On your website you have these I assume kind of simplified images of a long kind of U-shaped hole in the ground. It sounds like there's more to it, like how deep it goes exactly. You talked about potentially lateral drilling and stuff. What's involved in that?
One of the big areas where we're cutting costs is drilling productivity, and that comes from optimizing our rig suite and our processes for our specific end case. So most of the drillers out there, and we have so much respect for some of the other drillers out there. There are some unbelievably experienced groups that we really look up to, and largely they are exceptional at commercial drilling. And commercial drilling is different because you'll drill like 500 boreholes in a single large field. And so the optimization there is you get a much bigger rig. It's not that mobile, but it drills super fast each hole it drills, and it only has to move over 15 feet. We need these rigs to show up in a subdivision, drive around, navigate through some roads, plunk down a hole, and then maybe move over 50 feet, maybe move over 150 feet. And so the rig suite has to be more mobile. So we've been optimizing on smaller rigs and additional, ancillary equipment that's much nimbler and lighter. And that has really helped us, and we're seeing our productivity go up. And it's very low CapEx, which is a nice bonus. But the main focus for us really is on the productivity. So that's back on it. But then they answer your question about boreholes. So it's actually quite simple. So if you look at the output, we drill about a 6-inch diameter hole. So it's really quite narrow. And we drill that with a rig that drills straight down until we get to the total length that we need to heat and cool the home. So we're not and that will be anywhere from 80 feet per heating ton of the home. Confusingly for most listeners, heating is measured in tons, which has nothing to do with weight, but just think about it as a unit of heat. So a typical home will be a typical new home will be a 3-ton capacity home. So that home will require somewhere between 250 and 350 feet of drilling. And then, and so then we drill that deep hole, and then we chase down. Once we drill the hole, we pull our drilling equipment out, and then we run down the hole, essentially two pipes that are really right next to each other, but they're connected at the bottom with a little U called a U-bend. And we run
inside the same 6-inch diameter hole?
One in that same 1-inch hole.
Okay.
And we run them down, and then we actually chase it down with a third pipe that is what we use to fill the hole with grout. So those the two pipes that are connected they become our ground loop, and then we fill the entire borehole with grout so that it's cemented in, and it's basically everything is sealed and locked. And then we fill those two pipes with a water antifreeze solution, and that's what we connect into the house, into the heat pump. So the heat pump pumps water out of one pipe and it comes back in the other. So you get this circulation of water through the ground. And now the thing is, the ground is about, like I said earlier, anywhere from 55 to 65 degrees year round in most of the US. So what you're doing is you're getting the water up to that, call it 60-degree temperature, and then you're extracting that heat using a refrigerant cycle in the house. And a refrigerant cycle allows you to concentrate the heat. So we'll suck the heat out of the water. It'll drop down to 40, even 35 degrees. And then the refrigerant gets concentrated up to like 140 degrees. And then that's what we use to, we blow air over that and we heat the home. So that's how you're able to drive what sounds like awfully cool, lukewarm water up to heating temperatures for the house. And then it's the exact opposite in the summer. We suck heat out of the house and then we shunt it into the water. So the water ends up getting much warmer, into the 80s even, and you have 80-degree water running into the ground, and then it's pushing its heat into the ground. So you actually sort of recharge the battery, so to speak, in the summertime.
Right. And to your earlier point, your delta between that 55 to 60 degree earth temperature and the temperature you're trying to get to the house is a lot lower than if you were trying to do it from the air, where it's 0 degrees outside, you're trying to bring it up to 70 degrees inside.
Exactly. I mean, just do that simple math, right? You think like think of sort of the physics disadvantage. I've got this very dense substrate of earth that is at 60 degrees, and I'm going to suck heat out of this earth and bring it up really only 20 degrees to get the house. I mean, only 10 degrees. Nobody heats their house to 80 in the winter. So you're bringing the earth's you're taking the earth temperature up 10 or 20 degrees. And then in the summertime, it's a similar thing. You really, basically, the earth temperature is quite near comfortable, right? So
you don't need to change it.
Yeah. So, and then compared to on a 5-degree day, you need to get the temperature up 60 degrees to heat your house.
You're right.
You're climbing a much steeper hill.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
And so then the whole magic is getting the cost of that borehole down, and then having, which we've driven it way down, and then having, some support from, government or utility support that basically, to be clear, is not measured on account of environmental benefit, but is actually primarily measured on account of peak benefit it's a distribution grid benefit. It's a real dollars and cents capacity benefit. So that's kind of sort of the durable game here. And to that end, one last thing I want to make sure we get in here, because that's related to this. We're an unusual clean tech company that's actually benefited from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last summer.
I wanted to ask. Okay, how's that?
Yeah, so that was a bit of, as a broad matter, that bill was decimated energy efficiency and clean energy credits. And we were beneficiaries of some of those. In particular, we definitely missed the 45L efficiency credit because it really was a remarkable motivator to drive builders to do more efficient things. But so while we missed that, what we've really been a beneficiary of is the bill explicitly wrote into law that geothermal systems can be leased. And that allows us to take advantage of the remaining commercial geothermal tax credit, which is actually for any system that's primarily built in the US, which is essentially all geothermal systems, it's actually a 40% tax credit. And so if we lease the system as a commercial system, you get 40% off the top. And then when you layer on top of that these state and utility incentives, we're seeing some programs where the homeowner is almost paying nothing to lease this system. It's just it's so significantly discounted that there's very little left. And so we have leases anywhere from $30 a month to $80 a month, and in every case, they pay. The cost of the lease is far less than the energy savings for the home buyer. So it's in that program is that credit that federal tax credit has been extended into the mid 2030s. So it has a long runway. And so we've launched leasing in a few states already, and we're now rolling it out nationwide in the next couple months. So that's another big lever for us.
And is that limiting your scale at all, or are there certain states that are more favorable than others? Or I'm curious. I guess the real question is what's limiting your ability to go nationwide today and scale like crazy? Is there anything else?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest limits for us is like hiring and training and staffing up. So we just hired a new head of sales. We're hiring a bunch of new salespeople. That's my biggest focus. I've identified for our team, as I mentioned earlier, the three geos that were three regions that were that are most sort of the top of the tip of the not the tip of the iceberg, but like the peak,
kind of the highest impact,
and richest incentive landscape. And so we've been because we can afford to choose because we're just at the beginning of the journey. And that is the Mountain West, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast. And we'll be operating in those areas for the next couple of years before we expand again in all likelihood, because there's just so much green field. But yeah, the limits is really internal capacity.
Do you think you'll ever get back to retrofits? Because there's that's got to be a huge part of what's on the grid, right?
Yeah, I do. I think that one thing that we learned was that there was this big hidden project of retrofits, which is modifying ductwork. And it really is. It's retrofitting homes to be heated by heat pumps. And if you look at, we're very close with some of the regulators in the Northeast. And as we got to working with them, we got to, we saw public data, but we were familiar with because we were of our relationship, we got to see the data that probably it's literally online, but it's in databases and hard to find, and so we got this view. And one of the interesting data points was almost all of the air source heat pump retrofits are actually additions of air source heat pumps into individual rooms that had not previously been climate controlled at all. So people aren't doing
like adding a mini split.
You add a mini split in the garage, or you add a mini
Mm-hmm.
split in that guest bedroom that was never really air conditioned. And very few homes were actually removing their central heater and putting in enough air source heat pumps to be the not just auxiliary heat, but the core heat of the home. And that's what's facilitated the growth of air source heat pumps in part, is that they aren't really tackling that big problem of retrofitting ducts. So I anticipate that over the next few years, this is going to become increasingly apparent to policymakers. And when there's money to retrofit ducts, then the retrofit of the existing homes becomes a much more tenable project again. And I'm sure we're going to get back into it. And maybe it'll be different. Maybe we'll be more of an arms dealer of technology and of drilling services, and we don't necessarily do the whole thing. But there's definitely ways. We're very passionate about having the biggest impact we can, and over a 10-year period, 10% of the homes in America will have been built in that 10-year period. But we don't have a 100-year view. We have we want to get there in 30 years. So you've got to do retrofits.
Okay. If I can have a couple more minutes of your time, I have 3 questions that I ask everybody at the end of each episode. The first is, how optimistic or pessimistic are you about the future of the planet and why?
So I'm increasingly optimistic about our ability to avoid the worst outcomes of climate change. I bemoan and worry about my kids' ski season through that intervening period because we're big skiers. But I still think we have to keep our eye on it. To me, the metric I remain worried about is just how many species go extinct before we stop trouncing the planet. And I still think that there's a lot at risk. So I worry about climate, and I worry about habitat protection from that perspective. But my greatest existential worries have increasingly trended towards AI and bioengineering. So I worry, if you really want to talk about where I worry, that's where it is. But it's probably a little bit beyond the scope of this.
Okay, we'll do another episode.
Yeah.
Who's another company or individual doing something to address climate change that's inspiring you?
There's a bunch of, I'll tell you, Last Energy is a really exciting nuclear startup that I've been an advisor to for a while. And I just think Brett Kugelmass there has the clearest and most the least dreamy strategy for really scaling nuclear. And I think it's
SMRs, right?
Very promising.
Yeah, I would love to talk to him. Cool. What advice do you have for someone not working in climate today who wants to do something to help?
I'm quiet because my advice is so basic. It's obvious. It's like, look for a job in climate.
That sounds pretty good.
Yeah, there's a lot of great companies out there. I guess I'd say there's no better day to make the decision to make that transition than today. And a lot of companies need a lot of folks. And if you're talented and hardworking, you can start in a job that may be, if you're making a really abrupt transition from a totally different domain, I guess you have to count in some step back in seniority to get into a different field or role. And then the sky's the limit. And we need you.
It's pretty clear. I love it.
And if you're in sales in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic, or Mountain West, please check out Dandelion Energy, because we are hiring salespeople, and we're very eager to receive any new applicants.
There you go. We'll put a link in the show notes.
Awesome.
Awesome, Dan. That was really fun. Thank you for your time and for everything you're doing.
Thanks so much. It was really fun to be here, Dylan.
Hardware to Save a Planet is brought to you by Synapse. To find out more about us and how we develop hardware solutions for the world's most ambitious companies, head to synapse.com. And then make sure to search for Hardware to Save a Planet in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere you like to listen. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Synapse, thanks for listening.